Welcome, bienvenue to Demystifying the French, a bicultural conversation. My name is Renee Ketchum, and I'm thrilled to introduce this program as head of cultural events at AFUSA. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year to learn French, live French, and love French. Please visit afusc.org. We have some fabulous events coming up. Next week, we have a virtual visit of the Musée Camille Claudel. We have our second film night with La Nuit de Douze, which was so successful, and many other programs coming up in the future. So visit afusa.org and learn more and sign up. A few logistics. Please stay on mute during the presentation and stay on speaker view. Any questions should be put in the chat, and we'll try and answer all of them in the last 15 minutes of the presentation. And if you have any technical issues, sign back in after a couple of minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded to share with registrants of the event, and the total runtime is 1 hour. I'm honored to introduce today Janet Hulstrand, who is an American writer, editor, writing coach, and teacher of writing and of literature who lives in France. Janet is the author of Demystifying the French, How to Love Them and Make Them Love You, and A Long Way from Iowa, From the Heartland to the Heart of France. Edith de Belleville was born and raised in the Parisian neighborhood of Belleville, just like Edith Piaf. Edith is a licensed French tour guide and attorney, a licensed teacher of French for foreigners, and the author of 2 books, Belle et Rebelle, À l'ombre des grandes Parisiennes, and Parisian Life Adventures in the City of Light. So welcome to Janet and welcome to Edith. And I just thought that I would just add a little comment before we start that it would be interesting. We want to make sure that we clarify that this conversation today is in no way an effort to stereotype French or American individuals. Janet has a wonderful quote in the beginning of her book that I will read by the famous Francophile, Henry James. And he says, "Compare them, I say, as often as the occasion presents itself. The process is both instructive and entertaining." And with that, I'm honored to introduce Janet and Edith.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to the Alliance Française, to the Fédération des Alliances Françaises USA, for giving me again an opportunity to talk about this topic, which is dear to my heart and of interest, I think, to lots of people. We have quite a few people here tonight. And so I want to just first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And especially I want to thank my friend Edith de Belleville for taking time out of her very busy life to come here and sort of be a representative French voice in this conversation. We've had 3 Zooms before this with the Alliance on the topic demystifying the French, but this is the first time we've had a French person on the program to be able to lend her opinion, her perspective to some of the things we discussed. So thank you so much, Edith, for doing this. And so we're just going to kind of have a conversation, and then I think later on, Melissa, I guess, will let us know when we can open up the discussion to questions from the viewers. But so I want to start. My first question for you, Edith, is this. A lot of times when Americans learn about my book, they ask me, well, what do the French think about your book? What do the French think about this that you've written a book about demystifying them? And of course, I don't really know a very good answer to the question, because I wrote the book really mainly for Americans. I wrote it mainly for an American audience to help Americans understand things about the French that they might not know, things about French rules of etiquette, French traditions, French ways, and just to kind of help bridge whatever cultural gaps there are. And so that's my main audience. That was my main audience. But I'm always very curious and very pleased to hear what French people think about it. And so I've heard from a few French people since I published the book, but and so far the reaction has been pretty positive. But that's my first question for you, Edith. What did you think about my book?
I liked it. First, I understood everything in English. So for me, it was a challenge to read in English. So no, it's very agreeable to read, and I think extremely relevant that you wrote. And it was nice. I mean, I was expected maybe that you would be more tough about us. And no, it's like a friend, you know, who writes to another friend. This is how I had the feeling.
Um, so thank you. Thank you for that. And I don't know, is there, I guess my next question for you is what cultural differences you might see between the French and the Americans. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Cultural differences? What is the
Yeah.
Alors first, I'm not expert of Americans. That I'm not a sociologist, and I have to tell that I've been to US, of course, and well, I have family in US, but and my clients are mostly American, but I'm not expert. So what I can tell is only my opinion, what I noticed about cultural. You mean in general of
Yes,
American and
just
French?
general things that you might have perceived.
Alors, what I note, I mean, what I'm very pragmatic, and what I so have many American friends in Paris. So what is interesting that I see the differences between American and French in the relationship. The thing I liked very much with American, especially American women, it's the sisterhood. This is something which is not, I mean, now it's more and more in France, but this is something which is, I really like, you know, I have the feeling that American women support each other, you know, that is something I like. I talk about my friends, but talking about people, well, maybe, you know, maybe I should write a book, Janet. That's
You
my,
could.
about
I
America.
think there's room for another book.
Yes, there is many things to say. In general, my opinion, or I could tell even opinion of my colleague as a tour guide, you know, because we mostly work with American 80%, that very smiling people, you know, that's the first thing when you say, what do you think about Americans? Smiling. That's the first thing. If you compare with other people, you know, or the Europeans, smiling people, and really optimistic. Is optimistic, optimist. Yes, that's something very American. That we, the French, well, me, I can tell, I can talk about all my compatriots, but me, I know I'm not optimistic at all. I complain all the time. I'm very pessimistic. And I think maybe that's something French, that the American are more not happy, but more optimistic. That's the two things, smiling, optimistic.
Well, one of the things that I think I mentioned in the book is that that is, I think, a characteristic that people see about of Americans, and not just the French, but Europeans in general. Um, Sometimes they say we're optimistic, and sometimes they say we're naive.
Yes,
So,
but
there's probably some truth in both of those ways of looking at it. But what about you were telling me recently, Edith, about so Edith is a licensed tour guide and an excellent tour guide, by the way. I've had her take groups of my students around Paris, and she leads some groups, I think, also online. But she's a wonderfully interesting tour guide, but she's also a lawyer. And you were telling me, Edith, that when you were a lawyer first, you were trained as a lawyer and working as a lawyer, and then you decided that you also wanted to go back to school to become a licensed tour guide so that you could lead tours in Paris. And you said there was a difference in the way that your French friends reacted to that news and your American friends. Could you talk about that?
yeah, French friends and French family. Yes, the French didn't understand. They say, why are you going to be a tour guide? I mean, being a lawyer, you have more money, it's more prestigious, and it's not. It's more interesting. They say you will. ridiculous. And my American girlfriends, they say, wow, it's wonderful. You do something else, you know, you will learn many things. Lucky you, you know, it was really, it was so funny to see different behaviors, you know. The same when I wrote my book. I have to say that you really did cheer me up, Janet. Remember that when I was very down, it's you who told me, no, you can do it. You know, that is something very American.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did, because it's a wonderful book. And Edith has actually written two wonderful books. Well, one, unfortunately, is only available so far in French. I keep hoping someone will translate it. Yeah, no, I'm glad that you wrote your books, and everybody should get them. They're really delightful to read and really, really interesting. Maybe, let's see, what else did I want to ask you?
My compatriot, not my compatriot. How do you say someone who has the same name than you? Edith Wharton, remember?
Oh,
Wrote about
your
Edith
names.
Wharton.
We say names, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
That you wrote about her in your book.
Yes, yes. You said that you really liked what she had to say. Would you want to comment on that?
I mean, I'm sorry, I can't tell her name properly, even my name in English, because I have a problem with TH. So I would say Edith Wharton. No, it's a woman, a writer I really, really admire. Really, she's a really great woman. What she did in France during the First World War, what she wrote, she was, I think, extremely subtle and smart woman. So when I saw that you were writing about her, I was very happy because
she was a real Francophile, and
yeah.
and she had really, really interesting things to say about the way life is lived in France and in the United States. And she wrote a book called French Ways and Their Meaning. It's a very interesting book. You can still get it. But it was published, I think, in 1917 or something like that, 1917, 1919. And what's really interesting to me is that a lot of what she says is still pretty true now, more than 100 years later. She talks about the French pace of life. She talks about the the importance of money in the two different cultures, and so yeah, I did quote a few of her. I took a few quotes for these things that she talked about, and they're in my book. But also, some of you may want to read the whole book. It's pretty interesting.
I think Melissa wrote the name of the book, Purchase of Parisian. I think she wrote the name.
What was the name of it?
I think Melissa, I saw something written about purchase.
Oh, I put the links to your books in the chat, but I can put the links to the other book too. I'll do that.
Sorry, yeah. I thought it was about the book of Edith Wharton. I'm sorry.
Let's see, what else did I want to ask you? Well, I want to ask you, what do you, as a French woman, or just as a person, what do you find mystifying about Americans?
Well, the American dream, that's something, you know, that the big fantasy for European, especially, you know, big country, that this is something also that I think I like, that when you fail, it's not a problem, that you can do something else. That's very American. And that anything is possible, even if you don't have the degree, you know, in France, it's more, you know, Europe, it's more, I wouldn't say rigid, but it's more, you know, we have square, and in the US, you are feeling everything is possible. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but that's the myth, that people don't judge you. That's very important, and very always cheerful and optimistic when you have ideas, you know, and that's, I think, I don't know if it's a myth, if it really exists. You have to tell me, but that's
I think it probably. I think what you're saying is true. That it seems to me that one of the best things about Americans is that we are pretty optimistic, and we're not afraid to make mistakes. We sort of are very comfortable with making mistakes, and view it usually, I mean, the thing that you hear always is, you know, that you make mistakes to that making mistakes is an opportunity for learning. So that's a very positive way of looking at making mistakes. And I agree with you. You know, whether, I mean, I guess where it goes into myth is where, you know, anybody can do anything. There's nothing stopping anyone from achieving great wealth and whatever. You know, it can be a bit extreme, and then that's, you know, getting into myth and not really recognizing some of the factors that go behind people failing and all that kind of thing. It's complicated, of course, but I think generally speaking, it's true that that's one of the things that's good about American culture. Another thing that comes up, it's come up before, I know, in one of the previous Zooms that I did about demystifying the French. One of the questions that came up, and I didn't really know how to answer it very well. I'm still thinking about it. And that is about sense of humor. Of course, sense of humor is a very individual thing. It's one of the things we notice about people is what type of sense of humor this individual or that individual has. So it's not like there's a national sense of humor exactly. But as already discussed, are there any general things that we can say about sense of humor in France and America? Any interesting differences there? Any differences, different points of comparison there? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think again, it's my opinion. It doesn't mean French have no humor. I mean, all the people like to laugh and have humor, but it's different. Maybe because we're Latin, it's more what we call in French that I don't know how to translate in English. It's a persiflage. That you make fun of the other people, you know, you make fun of the politician, you make fun of situation, but the concept of a self-deprecation that the English have or the American have or Anglo-Saxon, you don't have this in France. I mean, it's something extremely Anglo-Saxon, according to me, not French. I give you an example, just so you will understand. Once I did a guided visit, the same visit for a group of French and for a group of for Americans. And with the French, I say, you know, to light the mood, and I say, you know, Louis the 13, the kings, Louis the 14, Louis the 15, Louis the 16. I mix them. Oh, what a bad idea! They have all the same name, Louis. How do you want me to not to mix them? You know, it's complicated. When I said this to the Americans, they laughed. You know, they understood I was making fun. And the French, they really did. They smile a bit. And after the agency, it was a friend, Jeremy. He wrote me and he said, avoid to make fun because there is a woman who wrote, Edith, she should be, so myself, she should be more confident in herself. She said she's mixing the kings, but no, she's quite a good guide. She should be more confident, you know. So they didn't understand I was making fun of myself. So the Jeremy, the guide, he said, don't use this humor with the French, avoid, because they really think that you mix all the kings in France. And he wrote, as you're a lawyer, he said to me, it's exactly the same if you were telling as a lawyer to your client, tell me I'm mixing the criminal law and the family law. And you know what I answer? Because there is a difference.
And did he laugh?
Yeah, well, I think we knew that I knew the difference. And I say, because there is a difference with a question. So that's something, yes. And that's why I always say that American understand more my humor than French. And this is true, you know, I'm American laugh, the French just smile a bit, you know, not, I think I'm closer to the American or English with the self-deprecation. I think it's something of the, you know, the, how to say, second degré, when it's not, you don't think what you say. Maybe that's the humor I prefer.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I wonder why that is. Something to think about. Maybe it has to do with what we were just talking about a little bit earlier about Americans being very comfortable with making mistakes.
Yes.
It might be that maybe that's somehow related to being able to laugh at yourself, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. Like the English, that's the English humor too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of legal matters, and especially because you're a lawyer, one of the things that's discussed in my book is that the fact that our two countries, well, the United States has law based on British law, and in France, the law is the Napoleonic Code. And one of the things that is observed in my book by Adrienne Leeds, who is a friend of both me and Edith, and I think probably many people on this Zoom, and she has she's quoted in the book as seeing a matter of difference in national character that she feels is partly because of these two different legal systems that we live under. So as a French woman and as a lawyer, do you have any thoughts about that, about how the different systems of law may affect everyday life for everyday people?
I don't know. What I can tell you, my experience of American law is the American legal series. I have to say I'm a big fan. I think The Good Wife did ruin my family life, because I was watching, I couldn't stop watching. I'm a big, I think the Americans are the best to make the legal series or detective stories. So that's my experience of American law. I'm sorry. That's all I know. I learned with the lawyers I saw on TV. So the difference, I would tell you not to answer because I'm a lawyer, so I don't want to answer. There is a movie, French movie, which will be for the Oscar, Anatomy of a Fall. It's the French movie, Anatomy d'une chute. Hopefully they will win few Oscars, and you have a trial. It's interesting to see because you see how the legal system is very different, criminal law. But if I tell you this, I don't answer your question. What is the difference? I think the thing is that people think that in France or in America, it's like in France, meaning everything that is not prohibited by law is permitted. That you have in the US, right? Something like this. This is what I
think
understand.
that's something about that Napoleon that.
Yeah, no, I think that what she said, Adrienne, if I understood well, because English is not, that she said that in France, in the code, everything is written what you can do. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. If it's not written, you cannot do it. This is what she said. I mean, if I understood well. So it's, I thought about it a long time and I said, is it true? And because she said that in the US, so everything that is not prohibited by law is permitted, meaning that you can do anything you want, except if it's written, it's forbidden. And I thought, but is it like this in France? So I did researches, I did my homework. But I found the answer. I'm very proud of myself. It's not nice to brag in France. You never said that you're proud of yourself, but I am. So in fact, it's exactly the same concept, but it's not in the Napoleon Codes. That's why. It's in the Declaration of Right of Man and the Citizen in 1789, the French Revolution. This is where it's written. So it means everything that is not prohibited by law is permitted. Exactly the same idea, but it's in the Déclaration du Droit de l'Homme, so from the French Revolution. And I even have the article, have in English if you're interested. So maybe somebody would say it's not true. I have the proof. It's Article 5. And there are 17 articles in the Declaration of Human Rights. So it means it's important. And it says, so that's the legal words, the law only has the right to defend actions that are harmful to society. Anything not forbidden by the law cannot be prevented, and no one can be forced to do what the law does not order. This declaration, the question is, what is the value? It's exactly the same value as Constitution. And Constitution is the highest, the strongest law. Below you have Napoleon Code, and like in the US, Constitution is stronger. And Declaration of Human Rights, I mean, from the French Revolution, has the same value as a Constitution. So it's not in the Napoleon Code, that's why, but it's written in the Declaration of Rights of Man. So it's exactly like in US, but not on the same places.
Interesting. And I'm sure Adrian will be interested also.
Yes.
But what about, do you think that no, I don't, it's not a
question. That the question you had about French love complication. Remember that we talk about it.
Yeah, well, I do have a chapter in my book called A Passion for Complication, which is this phrase that another friend of mine who I interviewed for the book, Ellen Hampton, she's a historian, I was trying to explain to my students, I was trying to explain to them about how, this is becoming less and less an issue as everybody pays for everything with credit cards, right? But it used to be that, and it probably still is, that if you pay for something in cash, you get the sense that the person wants exact change from you. And they really want exact change. And it's confusing for Americans sometimes because they put a bill down and the clerk says, vous n'avez pas de monnaie? Well, they might not even understand that they're being asked for change. They could very well think they're being asked for money, which they have just handed over. So the whole thing is confusing. Anyway, I was saying to my students, and Ellen was visiting my class that day to talk about her book. And I said, I don't know why, but I do know that they really want exact change. So you should try to have it if you can. And Ellen said, oh, I know why. It's because they have a passion for complication, which to me explained so much about life in France as from an American perspective. But yeah, so that's where the phrase came from. And then in discussing this with you, Edith, you came up with exactly two different parts of the code, right? You want to tell?
Yeah, different explanation. My explanation is, I think it's not love for complication. I mean, about the change, I don't know. It's really annoying. I agree. But about people criticize, especially the expatriate in France, when you have to have the resident visa, they all complain, telling it's extremely complicated, that French administration is very complicated. So it's more, I can't say anything about having change. I don't know why. It's a mystery for me too. But I can tell about administration for people, or maybe you think administration is easy. I should ask you, Janet, what do you think about French administration? You think it's very easy or not?
No, and I don't think any Americans in France think that.
That's why you need a lawyer. That's why. Well, I think that's my opinion. I think it's not complication. I think the French administration is procedural. Procedural, meaning that it's true you have to fill the form number XW21 if you're American, or it's complicated for this. But when you have the form, it's okay. It's quite easy. Let's take an example. Maybe I'm wrong about the tax declaration form in US. All I know, it's my son who spent 6 months, who worked in New York, who told me. So maybe it was wrong. It's not my fault if I'm wrong, it's my son. He told me it's supposed, he said, Mommy, in the US, you need to be accountant and tax lawyer to feel about the tax declaration. It's very good. I see a woman saying this. Thank you. So it's extremely complicated. And I saw on Facebook, the American expats, they complain. In France, it's very easy. You have to find the right form. Okay, you have different if you employee, self-employed, but when you just have to put the amount of your income, and that's it. The government calculates. The government, you don't pay directly, it deducts from your salary, you know, that so you pay each month what you have to pay as tax, and that's it. You have to do nothing. It's quite easy, you know, that I think, and everybody think this.
Yeah, well,
And excuse me. Yes, that's.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. So yes, because I prepare everything, you know, for me it was a bit, I work a lot. I did study a lot. I did my homework. So the question is, so it's true that it can be complicated because you have, for example, to have the resident visa, you have to give proof, you have to bring many papers. Even for the French, sometimes for other things, we don't understand why it's so complicated, but it's not complicated. It's procedural. So the question is why? I think it's to protect the citizen, and because the law is the same for everybody, that, you know, in France you have liberté, égalité, equality, and it's a wall to protect you from the arbitrariness. I don't know if I pronounce well. Arbitrariness? Yes,
Arbitrariness, yes.
Yes. So that's why it's, you see, what you think complicated for the French, it's to protect you from everybody. The law is the same for everybody. So that's why. And why this? It comes from the French Revolution, so égalité. You have to think how was the administration in France before the French Revolution, Ancien Régime, when you had the kings. It was a society of privileges for nobility and clergy, meaning they didn't pay taxes. You could be on jail without a trial, that, you know, you could be sent to the Bastille, you know, Bastille, like the Bastille Day, the French Revolution, by what we call une lettre de cachet, meaning that the father of the family, of nobility, a man from nobility, could send his son to the Bastille without reason, without a trial, without a lawyer, and didn't know, you know, arbitrariness. That's it. So that's why the French Revolution wanted to make the law strong. And I think that's why administration, it's procedural to protect the citizen. That's my theory. Maybe you would think I'm a very bad faith and I defend everything and it's really complicated. But I think histories and French Revolution is something you have to have in mind in France. If you want to understand many things, French Revolution is very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, and one of the things I like about talking with you, Edith, and reading your books, and watching your tours is that you really have this incredible knowledge of French history, and I think a lot of that comes from your training as a tour guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is really interesting to know where these things come from and what the importance of the French Revolution was. So thanks for giving perspective on all of that. I wanted to also ask you what you think Americans could learn from the French that would make our lives better, and maybe also what you think the French could learn from Americans that would improve their lives. Any thoughts about that?
Yes. Alors, what the French could learn from American, the size of the parking places for cars. That's the thing I really loved in US. You saw how the square, how can we park our cars in Paris? It's a nightmare. So this is one thing. But except this, what the French we can learn, well, what I told you, to be more optimistic, you know, it's funny because I just give you an anecdote. I don't want to talk only about myself, but just to give example, I was at the police station, you know, for people on custody, and there was a colleague of mine who is a lawyer, African lawyer. I mean, he's a French African. He comes from Mali, and we talk about this. And he said, "You know what?" He was so funny. When I was in Mali, in Africa, I was, you know, African are happy. They make fun. They're very lively people. And he said, "Now, you know what? I think I'm French." I say, "Why?" "Because I complain all the times." We start laughing, you know. So that's yes, being more optimistic. Don't judge people. That's that the French judge a lot, you know, that something I think that it doesn't mean American are, you know, they have no defects, but this is something that optimistic and less judging people and accept, you know, when people fail. That's something we should learn from the Americans. And what the French, well, I think that the American, I wrote this in my book when I talk with my American friends, they say in the US, especially in New York, they say the Americans are always in action. Do it. You have to do things. The do it list. You have to do this, you have to do this. And the French, we're more in the moment, you know, in the present, that we stop doing things. When I was with Adrienne, when I took Adrienne the cafe, I met a very good friend, an American, very nice, always smiling. He's really, I told him, please don't change. Stay as you are. Don't become like us, the Parisian, grumpy and complain. Be nice. And he was very happy to see me. Hello, how are you? Super enthusiastic. And he said, what's new? What's new? What do you know? And I thought, I had nothing to say, you know, I felt stupid. And I thought, oh yeah, it's very American. What do you do new? And I said, well, nothing. I say, I'm sorry, I have nothing, you know. So maybe American, maybe less action and more, you know, enjoying the moment. Just, you know, have a cup of coffee. When you have a cup of coffee, you sit and you have a cup of coffee. You don't walk and drinking your coffee while you walk. You sit and you enjoying your coffee or your tea. That would be my.
Well, that's an interesting little anecdote that you just told about the sort of stress on an action by Americans, and it's true. We tend to be always trying to accomplish, you know.
But I'm sorry, I have to say, to be optimistic myself, as my son, because I have a son very smart, he said, Mommy, do you think that America in 200 years, they were small countries, they became the most powerful country in the world because they did action? You know, I mean, it's a good thing to act, because now look at the Americans, you're the best, you know, you're the strongest country. So it means that when you do things, it's fine.
Yeah, as long as we're doing the right things, right?
Exactly. That's another question. But, you know, when my son, who spent 6 months in New York, and he changed a bit, it's funny, me, I was complaining. And he said, why do you complain? Write your book, do something. I said, oh, you're right. I never thought about this. And I wrote, you know.
Well, I think that in many regards, when we talk about these kind of broad general cultural generalizations, and particular in comparing the French and the Americans, I think a lot of times it comes down to, you know, a question of balance, right? That somewhere in the different ways we are, there's a happy medium, and it's good to cultivate, you know, the best, I think, of the French way of going about things and the best of the American way, and try to maybe find that happy medium. Not that we ever really will. We're always going to be who we are. And of course, as we said in the beginning, you know, it always comes down to when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with individuals, and individuals are very stubbornly resistant to being stereotypes. You're dealing with an individual, you're dealing with that person, and their characteristics are unique and wonderful. But so anyway, I don't know if I don't think I had any other questions for Edith, but is it time for us to maybe do we have any questions building up, Melissa? Or
we have lots of questions, yeah. Renee, do you want to start?
Sure.
Start at the beginning?
So we have a lot of comments, but so the comments you can sort of see on your own, a lot of hellos, and one comment. So let's go to some of the questions. There's a really good question here from Linda Witt. Linda Witt says to Janet and Edith, quote, do you find that the French may also expect persons to stick with their official accreditation certification and can be less understanding when people switch careers or try something out of their formal training? that might be at play with Edith's friends who struggled with her changing career paths from lawyer to, when you talked about, you know, moving from the law to becoming a tour guide and a writer. Can you respond, either of you? I think specifically Edith, because you spoke to this point.
Can you repeat the question? Because it
Yeah.
was
So the question, so Linda is basically asking, do the French expect, like, for example, did your colleagues expect you and your family expect you to maintain your career as a lawyer? And you had suggested that their reaction was such that they couldn't understand why you would leave the law to become a tour guide and do other things. But I mean, is it very French to stay within that
Yes.
box?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think it's very French. It's, I mean, or maybe European, I don't know, but yes, it's very, you know, because you study so much, and yes, or maybe it's very American to change, you know, the job and to do other things. But I would say yes, the French, that you do one thing. That's why it's complicated for actors who are singers. You know, look, this in the US, an actor is a singer, is a dancer, and is an actor. Many, you know, in France, you're an actor, you're an actor. You're not a singer, you're not a dancer. People don't, you know, it's more complicated when you want to be free of this.
So just as a follow-up to that, do you think, and I think the audience would think this was interesting as well, I mean, the whole nature of the educational system, in other words, before you take your back, you have to decide as a French individual, sort of the career path that you're going to take at a very young age. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And as I would think that as a result of that, I mean, you're not pigeonholed. I mean, people can make changes, but there's so much work done to decide and complete your academic studies based on your back, and if you don't pass your back, then there's a whole different scenario that's open to you, a very different system than in this country.
Yes, it's complicated. I mean, in France, you have to know very early what you want to do, and if you change, you know, it's complicated too. But now less and less. I think the system is more flexible, fortunately. So you have the right to do something else if you want. But it's
Edith, you actually are still practicing law, right? So you're
yes.
actually doing both things, right?
Yes.
Which is maybe even more unusual. I don't know. But
I have to pay the bill.
and actually, you know, interestingly, I have an American friend who lives in the same village as me, who was just saying she was just talking about going for an interview in a museum, and she has a background as a teacher. And she said one of the questions that came up in the interview is that the interviewer said, "Why aren't you still teaching?" And which felt like an odd question to her because she just wanted to do something different now. And then a French friend who was in the same conversation said, "Oh yes, well he probably thought, you know, why would you change? Why would you change from being a teacher to working in a museum?" To an American point of view, there's not really that much difference between, I mean, you could easily think of it of museum work as a type of teaching. And I guess it's different in France, as you were saying. The example about actor, singer, dancer is a really good one, that things are more defined. Roles are more defined, I guess. Right?
So we have another question from Gail. I don't know if this is a valid generalization, but my observation is that the French are much more knowledgeable about and proud of their cultural heritage and their history than Americans are. Would Janet and Edith agree?
Yes. Proud. I don't know. Proud. I don't know. Well, I would say the same for all Europeans, you know, the same in. Are we proud of our history? It's a good question. Yeah, because Americans are not proud of their history.
Well, I think the question is, do you think that the French are more proud of their history? And maybe,
if we
maybe
are
that,
more proud.
yeah.
Ooh la la, I don't know. It's a big question. We're proud of our heritage, and then the history and the heritage and culture is important in France. Like in, you know, in Italy, in Spain, have the same feeling that history and is important too, and culture. But if we are more proud, that's, I don't know. I cannot tell because I had the feeling that Americans were proud too. And I think it's a good thing to be proud of your culture. I think it's, everybody has to be proud of our history, of the history of his country. I think it's important. It belongs of the self-esteem, you know, to be proud of your culture and your country or your language, the things that I think it's important. So you have to be proud of your history.
Well, and then Monique, who has a number of questions in the chat, suggests that maybe the reason for that, and given that question, is that America is a very young country. I mean, the history of France, the history of Europe, you know, you're dealing with two very different histories in terms of time. So that
Yes, it's true. Yes, it's a
the depth of your history is longer than that of the United States.
yes.
A comment, and this is very the whole issue of comedy in France and the United States is a big one. And I'd like to comment as well, but Sherry is saying American versus French stand-up comedy, which is in-person comedy, is interesting. Much more self-deprecation in American stand-up as a source of humor.
Yes.
Which is, I think, very true to your point that
Yes.
in France it's.
If you ask me my advice, I wouldn't be very nice, but the French on the stand-up comedy, I never laugh. I even don't smile at all. Yeah, but that's me. I'm sorry. Yeah. I would say they're not funny at all when they're American, especially Mrs. Maisel. You know the series, Mrs. Maisel? Hilarious. But it's not nice what I say. I'm sorry. I'm very outspoken. I'm very French, but the French humor people who make, I don't know, the other French, they laugh, but me, I don't think they're not very funny. But that's, I think it's a bit vulgar. I mean, it's my opinion, but I'm sorry. I know, I guess people won't agree with me, but I think Americans are more funny, especially the stand-up. It's American, it's not French. So you really, when I see them, you have feeling that it's a copy of the, you know, of the Americans. For me, it's stand-up is American, it's not French, but well, that's my opinion. I'm very conservative, not very, I'm a bit narrow-minded.
Well, I'd like to mention, there's an American stand-up comedian who's married to a French woman and has, you know, he's raising his children in France. He lives in Paris. His name is Sebastian Marx.
Oh yeah, I know him.
And he's very funny, and he actually performs stand-up in both English and French. Yes. And I went to see him. He was doing a show just before the pandemic. He did a show in Troyes, which is the nearest big city to me. And I went with a French friend. I didn't get everything because it was in French, but I enjoyed it a lot. But the audience was absolutely laughing their heads off. It was really interesting. I mean, he is bridging this absolutely this cultural divide. But anyway, he's an interesting talent for people to know about. He's got a website. He does a lot of little YouTube videos about the French language, and it's
funny,
all
yes.
very
Yeah,
funny.
very funny, yes.
Yeah.
I know him when he was not well known at all. I went to see him. Yes, he's American.
Yes, he is American. He's definitely American.
Yes, he's very funny.
But it was interesting to see. I mean, and also really impressive, you know, just to see that he was able to do his thing in French and have this whole French audience really on his side. You know, it was a really wonderful experience, really.
It's a big dilemma, not a dilemma, a challenge, French humor. And we talk about it a lot in this country because, for example, in cinema, French humor does not translate in the American market very well at all. There's a perfect example called one of the most successful films that you produced in France, La Famille Bélier, which was a huge success in France. And it was all about laughing at. It's that persiflage that you talk about. So we couldn't show it in this country because of the fact that in the film they make fun of deaf people. It's not funny for Americans. I saw it in Paris with some American friends who said, Renee, you cannot show that film. The remake was Coda, which won the Sundance Award in the United States. It won the Oscar, and it was because it was more self-deprecating. Same subject, treated very differently. So humor in France and America is very, very difficult to relate to. And I always use you absolutely love Jerry Lewis in France.
I mean, I don't like him.
Sorry. And in this country, Jerry Lewis is never. Anyway, on to some more questions, but the humor often does not translate. So Fenel Dumonville is asking, based on your opinion, what would you say in regard to tradition in France?
My opinion? Well,
yes.
Traditions are very important. I think it's a good thing, especially about food. That's something important. Yeah, tradition, it's
And Rob is asking, is there a difference? This is an interesting question. Is there a difference in American law? This is for Edith, I think, versus the Napoleonic Code concerning women. The Napoleonic Code seems more patriarchal. Is that true? Are women treated equal to men?
well, I think maybe you talk about the 19th century, huh? Yes. Now it's okay. I mean, more or less. I mean, we fight. I mean, it's not especially the salary, the problem. That's the big problem. But I think you have the same in US, that a woman has not the same salary than man. I think it's unfortunately, except maybe in the Scandinavian countries, but all over the world, it's the same problem. I think but no, it's Napoleon didn't like women. I mean, he didn't like women. He was a chauvinist, it's true. But now, fortunately, now you have more female lawyers than male lawyers. If I'm not wrong, more women are lawyers than men. So no, now it's not perfect. Anything is perfect, but we tend that. I think it's fine, more or less.
Pam Lloyd is asking, Americans have a tendency to compare things a lot. She's using an example, that cathedral is bigger, prettier than that one. I haven't seen the French compare in the same way. They appreciate what they're experiencing at that moment.
Yes, and what, it's a comment or a question?
It's a comment and a question. Do you find that, I mean, Americans are always, maybe, I think the way she's phrasing it, you're at a beautiful cathedral. Oh, this is wonderful, but Notre Dame is better, instead of, it's back to that concept of sort of savoring the present moment.
Because maybe, well, yes, was something. I didn't know how to answer so many complicated questions. Sorry. So I don't know, maybe because it's big country, so you think you compare. Yes, it's true that we enjoy what we have, and that's it. We don't compare. Yes, I mean, doesn't mean don't compare, but I don't know where it comes from. Maybe a young country, or maybe don't know, but it's true that yes, we enjoy what we have and we avoid to compare. And
You're not always comparing it. Here's a comment based on when you were talking about a person's career. Marcia says the research shows that the typical American will change jobs at least 8 times, and even more if the person is working in a high-tech field. No law says you have to stay in the same job all your life. So it's more of a comment on the fact that we she wanted to state that we are not committed to stay, not committed. We tend to change jobs more frequently based on our system.
yes,
The next question is, why is it so difficult to integrate into Parisian society or make a meaningful friendship in France as an American? That's probably for both of you.
Complicated to have French friends? That's the question.
Why is it so difficult to become part of the social scene, for example, in Paris, to integrate, to make friends, or to make or develop meaningful relationships?
But you know what? I think it's the same everywhere, because I tell you the opinion of my son when he was in New York. You know, you have your real friends, you meet your friend at university, at school. And if you know, when he was in New York, he told me, I had colleagues, it was extremely complicated after they didn't want to have a drink, they wanted to see their family, and I was all on my own. So he told me, why is it so difficult to have friends in New York? You know, he asked me. I think it's because your friends, you know, you met them very early, so it's complicated to have new friends. I don't think it's, and but it's true that French, especially Parisian, are more more discreet, you know, more private, and they keep their privacy. Well, I will tell you an anecdote. I had a very good American friend. She was from Chicago in Paris, and I told her she was invited to more parties than me. I said, why? You have more friends than me. She was invited everywhere, you know. She had friends and me had no friends, you know. So you see, it depends. I don't know. I was very, not angry, but annoyed. I told her laughing. So you get on my nerves. You have more friends and you're invited than me, because I guess I'm not very exotic. So I think, no, I think if you come to Paris, if you're American, you can be invited in many parties, more than me, at least. I can tell you, more than me.
What, this is a wonderful question. Edith, what do you think about the series and Emily in Paris?
Alors, I'm not very, how do you say? I did have a thesis in Emily in Paris, because I did a lecture about Emily in Paris. I did one for an American platform. I was paid. I did one for a businesswoman of Hong Kong. So I think, I know that it's people say, oh no, it's not nice, blah blah blah. But I think it's not a documentary about Paris, and you have to see it as it is. It's something light. They never say it's a documentary how the French, the Parisian live in Paris, which is not. It's fiction. It's funny. It's, for me, it's light. No, I laughed. There's things which got on my nerves, but if I have to say, no, I liked it. I smiled. I didn't laugh. I smiled, and I thought it was funny. And the things you think it's shallow, but it's not so shallow. I think it's very interesting about how she changed, how Emily changed when, thanks to Paris. You see how when she arrived, and at the end, how she became more French. And it's interesting to see how the city changed her, shaped her. I think that's an interesting angle. No, I like it. It's fun. I mean, it's not intellectual, but it's fun. But not all people think like me. Huh? Most of my friends, they don't like it, I have to tell you. I'm honest.
So we have time for just one or two more questions. I know that Janet has a really interesting chapter in her book. I don't know if it's a chapter about intellect and about, you know, and critical thinking of the French. And it really differs, I think, and what people talk about. So Marcia's asking, or saying, American schools no longer teach critical thinking, and history courses are optional in many schools now. Well, she then I think she's very interested in what the French schools are teaching in terms of what we're kind of neglecting a little bit in some schools in this country. So are you still, for example, the French system, is philosophy still something that's still included in a young education, or what subjects are focused on in French schools?
You ask me?
Either of you.
Yeah.
Well, I know that Janet talked about intellect.
Yeah, you know, that's, you know, I think I liked when Janet talked about Edith Wharton, but I think what I prefer is when Janet talks. It's when Janet talks about what she thinks, and what you wrote, Janet, about philosophy. It's the first time I see this, and it was extremely relevant. I think you understood everything. That we, all the kids, all the teenagers, sorry, at 17 years old, they must have philosophy class. or sometimes it's 8 hours by week or 2 hours, it depends, but it's compulsory. Why? Because as you say, Janet, and it's really true, the France wants to make citizens who can criticize and who can vote. So that's why the French, I think that's why we criticize everything, because this is how we are shaped, you know, the brain, to always, we don't take things for granted. And that thanks to the philosophy. And I think this is something interesting, you know, that this is how you see French, that it's true, maybe we criticize too much, but it's a way that we don't take things for granted. And that's why you have so many demonstrations in France. That's it. That's another point. But that's, I think it comes from the philosophy. Yes, that's something important. That's what Janet wrote was extremely, very true. According to me, it was very true.
Janet, would you like to respond to this very important question? And then we'll have to say goodbye to all of our wonderful little Zoomers.
Well, I think, well, thank you. First of all, Edith, it pleases me, of course, to have hit something on the head. But yeah, I think it's one of the things I really admire about the French is that there's a seriousness about thinking, I think is what I said. And there's a training for it. There's thinking about thinking, which is what philosophy is in part. And I think that's really important in making citizens who can, you know, make good decisions and judge what's going on in an intelligent way. So it's one of the things I really admire about the French. And I do think that would be good for us if we had more of that. And also just more knowledge of our history. The question that came up before about what, whether we're proud of our history. I think Americans just don't really know enough about their history. It's too bad that it's not being required everywhere. But anyway, that's all I have to say on it.
On that very important note, on behalf of AFUSA, we really like to thank both Janet and Edith for this wonderful conversation that continues to demystify the French, as well as the Americans. And we hope you'll come back and continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
We have a slide, Melissa, for the books as to where, can we show a quick slide of the books if we have them? So here's Edith. Here we go. Okay. Here's Janet's book, Demystifying the French. And I know it's back ordered on Amazon, so don't lose, just make sure you order it. And Parisian Life by Edith de Belleville. And I just bought your new book, Edith, and I'll read it in French. But we hope that it'll be translated in English for some of our audience. So thank you to everybody. Bon weekend à tous. And hopefully we'll see Edith and Janet again to continue this conversation.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.